we're going to talk a bit about how Jamf is thinking about the user experience. So I'm going to present your presenters in just one moment, but before I do, we are going to work to have a little bit of Q&A at the end, and I just have one ask of that. Please hold your questions to the end. I guess I have more than one ask. And as well, we're going to provide microphones for you. I'll be walking around. My friend Chu, who's in the back with his hand in the air, will also be walking around. So just put your hand in the air. One of us will come and find you, hand you a mic if that's the case, and we'll have some fun from there. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce your presenters. I've got Adam and Amanda from Jamf's user experience team.
Hi, everybody. I'm Amanda.
Hello.
It's loud. I can hear myself. Thank you so much for joining us. Last session, the last day of JNUC 2018. That is super exciting. So you probably want to know who we are.
Yeah, my name is Adam Barth, UX designer at Jamf, and I've been with Jamf for just under 4 years now.
I'm Amanda Sandbeck. I'm a user experience researcher, and I've been with Jamf for about 1.5 years. So what were we going to talk about today? How Jamf is thinking of user experience. If this isn't where you were going to be, it's too late. You guys are stuck here now. So we're going to learn about this. And we're going to learn about what is user experience. So we want to cover kind of the basics so everybody has some common knowledge as we go through this. We're also going to talk about what it isn't, so a few of the major misconceptions that we often run into. Then we're also going to talk about UX at Jamf. And in that, we're going to talk a little bit about our team, our structure, our process. And in that process, we're going to run through a case study and show you kind of how we go through the actual process with a real case study that we did recently. Then we are going to talk about supporting your solutions with UX. So hopefully what we'll be able to do with that is give you guys some really high-level ways that you can take some of the info that we're going to talk about, bring it back to your facility or site, and apply some of the techniques in your own area. And then last is what's mentioned, Q&A. So.
And happy hour after this. We will definitely be there. You can count on it. So if you're not comfortable with going on the mic, feel free to find us out there. We definitely want to hear from you. So.
We're nice.
Yeah. So starting off, what is user experience? I'm sure you guys have a pretty good understanding, so we'll just kind of go over the foundations before we kind of get more into our process. But some of the popular misconceptions is where we start. The first one is probably the biggest that we come across, and it's that, you know, what is user experience? Oh, that's just the UI, right? The interface that I interact with, the buttons, the colors, the pretty stuff. You know, UX designers, we make things pretty, right? It's a bit more than that. UX is not just UI, although it depends on a good user interface. A good user interface doesn't ensure a good user experience. You might have an application on your phone or a website you know of. You know, looks pretty good. Seems like it's been designed by a design team or an agency somewhere. But you can't find what you want to find with it. You have issues navigating. You get bloated with ads all the time. So there's workflow problems there, and that is a part of what user experience is. It's not just having a good UI. There's workflows. There's making sure you can get your tasks done that you need to so you can find value in that application. And that isn't just done through the interface. So that's the biggest one. A couple of others. The next one's more specific to our process. A lot of people think, you know, product management passes down a feature, and the design team takes that feature, does our stuff, and then makes it pretty, passes it back to the engineers. The engineers and developers take it and build it and actually make it work, and then it goes out for the next release. That's kind of more of the waterfall methodology, and all of that has in the past been a thing. We definitely prefer not to work that way. Jamf is an agile company, and if we worked in a waterfall, the downside of that is we don't get to pull in as many inputs that we need to pull in order to create a more on-point solution. So we need to talk internally to developers, to technical writers, to stakeholders and subject matter experts, support, support, and externally, definitely need to be talking to you guys, our end users that actually use the product, and that's where the research team comes in. So we need to do that to make sure we're developing the right solution. So we can't do that just by ourselves off in our corner. And the last one here, UX needs to be completely original. Just kind of an example of that. If you have if you're going shopping on Amazon.com, or you're buying tickets to the next concert that's in town, or you're just renting a car, different things, right? But you're still going kind of a similar experience. And that's because there's consistent patterns that have stood the test of time that we do not need to reinvent the wheel to try to find something new. So the UX doesn't need to be always completely original, unlike logos and things like that, where you think needs to be cutting edge and spicy. The UX does not. We pull from existing patterns, and yeah. So that's some popular misconceptions.
You're going to take us down a memory lane, right?
That's right. So hope you guys brought your time machines. It's required for this presentation because we're going back to the winter of 2001. To set the scene, Hanging by a Moment is by Lifehouse is at the top of the charts. Other bands with hit songs include Destiny's Child, Outkast, Matchbox 20, System of a Down. Shaggy. Yep, Shaggy. And then, let's see, Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter are just coming to theaters with their first films. So, bringing you back. If that brought you back to high school, sorry. Hope not. But we all have decided we're going to ditch our Discmans and finally upgrade to an MP3 player. We've been holding back, but we're going to finally go for it. And what can we expect based on our past experience? Well, probably something like this. On the left here, kind of your typical electronic store that we'd most likely try to find our MP3 player in. You got products stacked on the ground there, as well as in rows in the back shelves. So we'll have to do some searching to find it, but we'll get there. And when we do, we'll probably find a variety of different MP3 players. There's a couple on the right that were out at that time. As you can tell, it's not terrible. The design of the hardware has definitely gotten better since the early mid-90s, so that's an improvement. But with the packaging, you can kind of get the sense that that was just the last-minute wrapping that was put on. And so, not terrible. We still get our MP3 player, and it does what we want it to do. But it's nothing to write home about either. But we've heard about this other store that just opened up, 25 locations within the US, and one just happens to be next door. So we're going to go to that right now. And
ooh.
Thank you, Amanda.
You're welcome.
And most of you, if not everyone in this room, has seen an Apple store, has been inside an Apple store. And this picture from 2001 might even start looking a little outdated based on where they are now and where they've gone from. But definitely a big difference from the kind of your generic electronics store. So we're going to go in here. We're going to find our MP3 player. A little bit more easy to do. We're going to purchase it, go home, open it up, and this is what that looks like.
Ooh.
How many people here actually did purchase the first or second generation iPods? Okay, about maybe half the people in here. So maybe some of you can remember that experience. Today, all of us who have gotten an Apple product since, it's nothing new. But back then in 2001, packaging, opening it up, interacting with the hardware, plugging it into the computer, songs uploaded, and finally enjoying it. That's all to say the user experience didn't start with just interacting with the screen. That's because what the user experience is the emotions and attitudes a person has when using a product or service. So it starts from when we enter that store to when we went in, purchased it, took out the packaging, and started using our new toy.
Yeah, and Adam's talking about a really great experience, and oftentimes what we remember are bad experiences. So UX isn't just great experiences, it's also those poor experiences, which, like I said, you tend to hold on to. I am an avid online shopper. I love buying stuff online because I love when it comes to my house, and I have packages and tons of stuff to open because it's like my birthday. And I know what I'm getting, so I'm happy. But then it becomes really clear when the customer is the afterthought, because you open up the package, you're really excited, and it looks like somebody threw it in there and they didn't really think about anything else. And that kind of diminishes the entire experience, at least for me. Because I'm like, I just spent money on this, and I was super pumped, and now I just opened it, and this kind of sucks. So that's to say, there's both sides of it. UX has to deal with good and bad, and yeah.
Yep, that's a good point. Here we have a quote from Steve Jobs, just a little background. This was his first WWDC in '97 after he came back to Apple. There was a developer, he was doing a QA. There was a developer that wasn't too happy with Apple's decision to get rid of OpenDoc. And he voiced his opinion with a question asking Steve Jobs, what are you on about? What are you doing? Why? It doesn't sound like you understand anything about OpenDoc or Java. OpenDoc is obviously superior. Why are you guys doing? You're ruining things. And he was understandably probably upset, but Steve Jobs, it's part of a video. I would recommend YouTubing it. It's called like Steve Jobs Answers Insult or something like that. But he basically, politely answers with a 3-minute answer. Part of that is you've got to start with the customer experience and work backwards to the technology. You can't start with the technology and try to figure out, hey, where can I sell it? In other words, that means you build something and you're hoping that tech, because you're so excited about that tech, you're building around that and you want to try to market that, but instead of doing that, it's what does the user want? Let's start there and build from that. Admittedly, caveat with this, a lot easier to do when you're starting out with a new product or website or application. Way easier. A little more challenging when you're trying to switch with a current application that's been around for a while, and that is more ingrained in the technology. And as an example, Jamf is just like that. And we'll touch on that a little bit more in a bit. But the good news is any company, any software development company can change their focus from a technology focus to a user-centric focus. It just takes a little more time and just motivation and persistence. UX design, so talked about user experience. What is user experience design? Pretty straightforward. Obviously, Apple's experience that we went through wasn't just an accident. They had that intentionally set up and made. There was work that went into all that. There was research by many researchers, years of research, years of testing and iteration to get to that point. All that is considered the work, or the UX design. So it's the process of creating a product that provides meaningful and valuable experience, hopefully empowered by user research. It's also a collaboration of different UX disciplines. You think of UX, you think designers, but there's also information architects, researchers, content strategists, and interaction, information, and visual designers. So all of them kind of come together to meet the goal of translating customer and user needs into the product, making sure you guys can easily use the product and get the value that you're looking for.
Yeah, and UX has a common goal. All of us as researchers, architects, designers, we want to create a great experience. And during that great experience, if we can throw in like something that's delightful or fun, that's always a bonus. But in order to achieve that, we have kind of processes that we try to follow and establish throughout the thing so we can make sure that we give you guys something that's valuable at the end. So we're going to walk through a little bit of the team history.
Yeah, UX at Jamf. Been around for about a little over 4 years now. We started out with 3 generalists, and the reason, or what I mean by generalist, is that we were all kind of had our projects with our teams, and we were individually in charge of the research, the architecture, and the design that we had to do. Obviously, when you're in charge of 3 of those things, you're stretched a little thin. You have to maybe condense your research and do more of a guerrilla research, and architecture and design have to be a little more quicker. Fortunately, happy to say, 4 years later, we are now a team of 8 specialists. We have 3 dedicated researchers, 2 information architects, and 3 user experience designers. So we've evolved, our process has evolved. We still have some of the same challenges. Going back to the Steve Jobs quote, and that Jamf is kind of, Jamf's been around for 16 years, since 2002. So the lifespan of our team has, relatively to that, is pretty small. So when we came into Jamf, maybe we would have liked to say, let's start over. Let's start thinking exactly about the user, where the admins are coming from, and build a product with potentially new workflows and new UI from that. But that ship had sailed. We weren't going to do that. So we had to think as a team, okay, what impact can we make? Where can we make it? And so you've seen things like the Jamf Pro 10.0 redesign, mobile experience, enhancing the mobile experience for self-service. Small wins like that that we can get in while we slowly turn the ship or the focus of how we design and create new features from being limited and restricted by the technology to asking what the user needs. One other challenge here, you'll see some very nice modern art on the right side of the screen. And what that actually is one of our UX designers, Josh, had a little project of trying to map out the UI for Mac OS configuration profiles. So what you see here is all the payloads and options involved in Mac OS config profiles. The reason I'm showing you this is because that's just one page, one location within Jamf Pro. What you can't kind of visually understand with this image is the connections as well to other objects like inventory records and device records that this has. So it's to kind of visually demonstrate enterprise UX. There's a lot to consider. We get a new feature or changing a new feature that might probably impact other areas around the product. So that's something we also need to be aware of when we're designing.
Yeah, if you were to take this picture and kind of blow it up and extend it to all of our other areas, it would look like a massive spider web, the way things are kind of intertwined. So tweaking one area sounds super simple, but then it breaks 12 other areas, and that's what we want to try to avoid. So that's why it's important for our team to have these kind of maps and understanding of the actual areas that we're affecting as we go through it. And so now we're going to talk about some of the goals that we have. And these goals are internal as our team, and they're also goals that we have as a company as well. And so our number one that we have across the board as a company and just our team is to promote user-centric thinking. And what that really means is putting users and admins at the center of our process and our thoughts. So when we're making changes and we're thinking about new features, really we need to think about how valuable is this to our end user, and is it going to be valuable? Are you going to use it? So to do that, we want to engage with you guys and actually interact with you. And so we try to do that by being present in a lot of various meetings to be able to say, hey, is that really what the user is going to do? We have personas that we use. So that way we can kind of try to continue the conversation and keep it within the realm of, well, you guys. So next one is engage and empower admins. So on Tuesday during the keynote, there was talk about this new feature that we have within Jamf Pro called Engage. And that is to help you guys with tooltips, some guides, highlight new features, be able to walk you through some things that might be complicated workflows, or people who are new to Jamf being able to kind of walk through stuff a little bit easier. And that's because we really want your feedback. So that's our way of trying to say, hey, keep talking to us, keep engaging with us. And even when you turn it off, we still want to know, how could we change this to make it more valuable in the future? So that way we can take your thoughts and actually apply it to things down the road. So empowering admins. We want to make a great experience for admins in general. We want it to be easy for you guys to do your job. But we also want it to be easy for you guys to have a great experience for your end users as well. So if we can have a conversation with you guys and understand your needs and what you actually do and how you do it, then we're going to create a better experience for you and your end users. The last one we have on here is relentless self-improvement, and that is one of our core values at Jamf. And the way that we kind of look at it as our team is owning failures, mistakes. We definitely know in the product there's a lot of room for improvement. There's a lot of complexity. There's things that maybe don't function the way that we all would love them to. So just kind of trying to own those areas that maybe we failed and reevaluating those workflows and engaging with you guys to be able to understand what changes we can make to something. An area that we have failed and we know is accessibility. And with that, we have actively attempted or are currently attempting to fix a lot of those and become more compliant. So we've had audits out so that way we know the areas that we need to improve on. And like right now as we speak, we're trying to make those changes so we can become compliant. So it really is not just owning the mistakes that we know we have, is learning from them and acting upon them. So with that, this is our team breakdown. So we have research, information architecture, and design. And on the right, you're going to see kind of this infographic that walks you through it, saying that it's really an iterative, it's continuous. When we launch something or something is completely finished, that's not actually the case. It's always can be improved. We're trying to figure out better ways of being able to maintain things and make changes to features when we release them. So it is constantly moving. It's not going to stop at any time. So what we're going to do is now we're going to break down each piece, so research, information architecture, and design, and then we'll show you an actual case study that was from our .com side and show you how we actually went through each step and what our process looks like and how you guys can become involved in that process. We'll talk about that at the end, but we're going to start with first phase, which is research. So this phase is called discovery, and this is our area where we're able to gather baseline understanding of users' needs, motivations, how you're going to use something in the future, how you currently use something. And then it's also, the biggest thing with research is to validate and reject assumptions, and that's throughout the process. So that's internal on our side. If we assume that a user is going to go ahead and they're going to click here, 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 we want to actually have you guys run through it with us so we can validate that, yeah, you're going to do that. And it's not just UX, it's product, it's stakeholders, it's anyone in our company who might be saying, I know our end users, I know what they want. And that's great, but sometimes you're right and sometimes you're wrong. And we just want to make sure that before we go and build something, that we actually are applying that. So the way we go about doing that is usually through one-on-one interviews. We do baseline usability studies on things that are currently existing, so that way we can have something to measure our success or failure on, if it goes better or worse. Focus groups, card sorts, heuristics, and surveys, and we'll kind of dive into a little bit of that as we go through. So the case study that we're going to walk through is Jamf.com, and on the right you're going to see a mouse moving around, and you're going to see a real user actually going through what was the original resources page on Jamf.com. And the resources page housed things like ebooks, technical papers, white papers, technical docs, sorry, infographics, kind of our area where you're able to find stuff that might help you. And what we found on this is we did a heuristic, which is an expert evaluation. So we had someone going through it, a couple researchers, a couple people on the UX team, go through and highlight those like major, like, whoa, this is a red flag, this should be fixed. And then did a baseline usability with actual users, gave them a task. They were actually asked to find a specific ebook, and then we were able to watch them, listen to what they had to say. And what came back is, these were the top findings. There were a lot of findings, but these were the big ones. So Jamf had assumed content awareness. And what I mean by that is we assumed that people came here and knew that they were looking for a white paper versus a technical doc, or they were looking for an infographic versus a video. And that's not always the case. You don't know what you're looking for, you just want help. And so that's what came out of that. We found some usability issues that were just making it really difficult to complete certain tasks and be able to find information. Usability and poor findability are usually kind of related, because if you can't use something, you probably can't find it. So they were not able to find the specific ebook. It took several minutes, which I don't know about you guys, but when I Google something, I don't go past the first page. So for me, not being able to find something and having to go through and sift through a ton of information is extremely frustrating. Even if it's on the second page, I'm never going to find it. So the other thing that came up was a lack of search options, and that's tied right back to that content awareness, where we were really just assuming that all you wanted to do was pick from a dropdown and you knew what you were looking for. So they weren't able to actually search for the right information. And so once we take these findings and kind of put them in a nice report, we're able to take research and hand it off to our architecture team to do their thing.
Yeah. So with information architecture, the goal there is they get all that good stuff from discovery, research's discovery phase, and they start kind of kicking off some initial concepts and ideas. Where they really want to get to is figure out, we already have the product. There's already a structure to that product. Where within that product does this new feature belong? Where within that structure? As well as this new feature itself, what should be the workflow in order for this solution to be successful? So they use the initial research to define the meaningful content and pinpoint the organization structure within the product. They use tools such as user journey mapping, which is a lot like storyboarding. And the idea is that is just putting themselves in the shoes of the end user, so they can go through the journey of starting to task completion. Sitemaps, they're more organizational based. They kind of map out the pages and sub-pages within the structure, as well as some wireframes. And for architects, they'll most likely create low-fidelity wireframes, which mean basically black and white with squiggles. Just think squiggles. Drawings, things like that. Yep. So they do that mainly because the focus is not on the visuals, it's on the concepts and the ideas of the workflow. But sometimes they'll create, so as we'll see with the resources case study, thank you, they have a low fidelity wireframe here. And for this project, there was 5 created. I'll zoom in there. As you can see, they were trying to meet the issues that were brought up during research, addressing the usability issues, trying to improve the findability of elements, as well as providing search options. So you see the filter there, as well as at the top of the search bar. This probably won't look too surprising or new or nothing fancy here. And that's because, like we mentioned before, UX uses existing patterns. If they work, they work. So why try to reinvent the wheel? Let's see. So they created 5 different solutions with mockups to those. Out of those 5, after some internal vetting and conversations with stakeholders, 3 were actually selected to become prototypes. And prototype here, difference between that and a mockup. Prototype just means there's some interaction applied to it. So hotspot buttons, things like that. So maybe clicking the button on the low fidelity mockup will go to another page. And the hope with those prototypes is we use those for the next round of research.
So it gets thrown back to research for exploration, and this is what it sounds like. We're going to explore those options, and we're going to have people actually give us feedback on their thoughts around the actual content and the structure that's in there. And again, going back, validating and rejecting those assumptions that we had before. And some of those assumptions come from research because they're things that we were told during research. So now we want to revalidate that and make sure that, hey, yes, that's still true, and yes, now we can keep going forward with our intended workflow. And the ways that we do this is prototype testing, concept testing, A/B testing if you just want to test minimal changes on there, participatory design, which is my favorite because we actually throw it to end users and have you either draw things out for us, like really getting involved in that design process and almost designing it with us alongside to help us understand like really what you're thinking. It gives us a really good idea of how you think about things and how you want them to be. Tree testing is a method that we use to validate architecture to make sure that people can actually find the content they're looking for. And so in this one, we did a prototype usability study. So several of the elements on each prototype were clickable. And the main findings that came back, and this happens a lot, is when you show 3 different options of something, you're going to get that they like specific things off of each one. So we try our best to go through, find those consistencies, and figure out what's going to work best, and try to incorporate those into a new single workflow. And with this one, we also found that it was decreased time on task. Even though this was just a wireframe, and it was the content, it was significantly faster for people to find a specific ebook on here, because that was their task, again, keeping it consistent with what we did in the first initial baseline, and then into the architecture, and then into our validation at the end, kept it consistent, so we'd have something to measure against. Increased findability and decreased time on task always go hand in hand, because if you can find something, you find it quicker. That's usually how it goes. And then the familiar UI, which Adam kind of mentioned before. This was something that people knew how to use. This is not a crazy out there like way to search for stuff. This is pretty familiar, having filter options, but that was the big thing was I can actually filter and I can choose what I'm looking for. Maybe I do know that I'm not looking for videos and infographics, so I can make sure that those aren't shown. And this area of research, the exploration, is often thrown back to architecture, so it goes back and forth sometimes because since there's things that they liked on each concept, we take that idea, throw it back to architecture so they can redo it, and then sometimes we do more research on it, and then if we're really feeling confident about it, we can send it off to our designers.
The designer's goal is to take all the work that was done by the architects and researchers and get to take credit for it. That's their goal because they get to create the final product. The final look, high-fidelity mock-ups is kind of, that's when the color, that's when it's a lot closer to what you're going to finally see on either the website or the product itself. But that still means, as the designers, it's not just applying a skin. We also need to think of kind of the flow of the page, also double-checking that the elements that are used, the UI elements, the interactions, are the appropriate ones in order for the task to be, in order for the user to complete the task with it. So might notice, hey, this group of radio buttons should really be a drop-down, or checkboxes, or what have you. So high-fidelity mockups touched on. Task workflows, they might that's a little more about the interactions within the page. Interactive prototypes, it's, again, the high-fidelity mockups with added interaction elements. And then the design system is something similar to style guidelines, where it just kind of ensures consistency, thank you. Consistency across all products by saying, here's what we use in this manner, here's how that looks, here's the colors that we stick with, and the fonts, and so on. So, for the case study, this was one of the screens, high-fidelity mockup. Again, looks pretty close to what will actually be built. This is being pulled from style guides, and I believe this one was a high-fidelity prototype.
Yep, it
was turned into a high-fidelity prototype. In order for the last step, can you guess it?
I got ahead of myself, I'm sorry.
Too quick.
I got excited. So the research validation phase is the final phase. So this is really surprising because we want to validate the final thing, make sure that, yep, everything works. And when we throw in those UI elements and the design, we want to make sure that nothing becomes distracting on that page because we spent a lot of time with the content and making sure that that structure was correct. So we want to still validate and make sure that the final design is actually functioning the way that it's supposed to. And so we do a lot of usability testing here. One-on-one interviews, field observations. If we can ever watch somebody use something in their own environment, that's the best way that we can do this, because then we can totally understand other things that might be affecting you as you're going through this. And then surveys to kind of gauge, what's going on. Do you guys like it? And with this one, if it goes, on the right, you're going to see someone who's actually going through a usability study, and it's just a snippet of it. And you'll see they can go through this. This particular prototype was completely, fully functional. They could type in anything. It was very responsive. It functioned as it would if it was a live web page. So in this one, what the top findings were was it was easy to navigate. So thank you, architects. It was aesthetically pleasing. So thank you, designers. And the decreased time on task was massive. So I think it ended up being almost a minute and 30 seconds time difference. So they were able to find that ebook on the first page. It took them a minute, or the first actual thing that we went through, the original resources page. It's like, took them that long. So they got a minute and a half of their life back using this actual search, trying to find the exact same information. So that's what we like to see. And then increase user satisfaction. I mean, if you save that much time and it's a lot easier, you're probably going to get an increased user satisfaction. But along with it being easy to navigate and aesthetically pleasing, a lot of the comments are, this was really easy, this is what I expected, I really like this is kind of cool. And so that's what we like to see, is when we make life a little bit easier. And so hopefully, showing you this process and going through what we actually do, because this isn't just for .com, this is how we go through our process with our other products as well. So when we're trying to make a change or validating something within Jamf Pro, we still go through the research architecture, research design, research whenever we possibly can. Because it does produce the best output that we can get. So hopefully, going through this, we can kind of answer how we're thinking about user experience is we are really thinking about the user. So we're trying really hard to make sure that we engage with you guys and talk to you. So let's talk a little bit about why you guys might want to use some of the stuff we talk about in your own environment.
Yeah, and that's kind of the reason why we kind of went a little more in depth with our processes. We're hoping maybe some of that is something you guys can leverage yourself in your own environments, because being able to think about the end users and designing a solution for that and building the technology around that after defining what they're looking for and what they want benefits you. I know it seems like weeks ago, but Dean's statement about it was a Star Wars reference, which is awesome. Love Star Wars. But by you removing yourself, like Obi-Wan, getting sliced up by Darth Vader, by you removing yourself, you become more powerful, and your end users become Jedi Masters, I think was the correct metaphor. So how can a better user experience for end users benefit you? Reduced IT help desk tickets and reduced user errors because they're able to complete the tasks that they want to complete. Increased adoption of new workflows, whether that's updating OSs, installing new printer drivers, or provisioning. And then it's also better solutions faster. When you start with the user first and build towards that, the solutions are quicker. You can iterate faster because they're closer to the mark.
So the other piece that's on here is the little thought bubble in the bottom, which is you are not your end users. And not saying that to be mean, it is true. I'm always being reminded of this. And as a UX team, we're constantly saying we aren't the end users. We need to understand what you need, not tell you what you need. And so when you're thinking about this in your own environment as well, something that might make sense to you and is super clear for you, especially if it's technical, might not be what happens on the other side. So that thought process going, this totally makes sense to me, that's going to be a breeze, and nobody uses it, might be because you're thinking about it a little differently than your end users. So keeping that in mind, we do that all over.
As a designer, I admittedly can catch myself saying, well, I wouldn't think that would be there, or that navigation doesn't make any sense to me. But that's not, got to remind myself, not the end user. That's not up to me.
I bring back research findings, and they don't always, it can be painful sometimes when an architect or a designer spends a lot of time on something and research goes out and they come back with things like, this didn't work, or this didn't go how I thought, or this isn't actually the way they want it to go. It can be a little heartbreaking because you put a lot of time in it, but at the end of the day, you want it to be successful and useful and valuable, so you're going to reevaluate it and try again, and maybe shed one tear and then move on. And the way that you guys can actually use these strategies, and I realize that you guys are full-time jobs, so trying to be very high level on this and trying to leverage things that you might already have in your environment. Observing your end users if possible. So if you're creating something that's new, actually watching someone go through it can give you so much insight without even having to ask questions. Just seeing where they get stuck, seeing if something's not working the way you intended, getting clarification on, sometimes we use verbiage that doesn't translate quite as well to our end user. So kind of evaluating that and understanding why is this confusing. Leveraging existing feedback loops. So you already probably have a ticketing system, probably take phone calls. And so with the tickets, you want to close those because you're probably on kind of a time thing. You want to make sure that you close enough tickets by a certain amount of time. But if you're seeing a consistent ticket come through, find out why. Don't close the ticket, or close the ticket, but figure out why is this happening, and maybe ask the person. And the way that you want to ask them is open-ended questions. Yes and no doesn't really tell you anything. If you can say, what would you change about it? What did you find confusing? That can help you understand so much more than just, yep, that was really confusing. Like, tell me why. Help me understand, and try really hard not to take it personally. Again, with the, just because it makes sense to you doesn't mean it's going to translate. And it's just a lot easier if you can try not to look like you're really angry when you're hearing these things. And phone calls, same thing. If you have them on the phone, talk to them, ask them a question, try to keep it open-ended. This next one is very much an if possible, right? Because sometimes you don't have time to create two workflows or create two things that might work, but if you're on the fence between them, if you can create something and have a couple people look at it and run through who maybe aren't in your same role or aren't quite as technical, or anything like that, it will show you that there are areas that maybe you missed, or it might show you like, awesome, this is good to go, ship it out, which can help you with your tickets. You might see a decrease in your tickets. Keeping the feedback loop open kind of goes back to that existing feedback. Continue asking them things. If you can send out surveys to ask questions about stuff, awesome. But it really, at the end of the day, it's about continuing to have conversations with your end users so you can understand why they're not doing something or why they are doing something. So that is pretty much all we've got, but we want to say thank you. And we also have a spot in the app that's the UX survey. So going back to how you guys can help us and you can participate is you can join our UX feedback group where you can join and then we'll send you an email every once in a while that says, hey, do you want to participate in this? This is what it's about, this is what it's going to do, and this is how long it's going to take. So you can actually be involved in like what you saw on the screen with the usability study. You can run through that, you can give us feedback. And so if you do that, awesome. There's also a couple other things you can give feedback on too. So otherwise, we appreciate you guys staying with us.
Thank you very much.
And if you have any questions, go ahead. Those are good. Cool. You have one.
Hi, Jack. Are you conscious of like training us over time with the design in Jamf? Like, for instance, the package list in patch management, is that training us to have the package list in policies change? You know, like, so we know how things work when you make a change to like an existing product? Like,
we don't prefer to try to train you to do anything unless it has to happen. We prefer that it's intuitive, that you don't have to be led, your hand held through this process. If it's a complicated thing, then we're hoping something like the new Engage will help you go step by step through that process and just be more apparent. But we're not going to try to hint or suggest things just to get you we're not trying to be that sneaky.
okay.
Does that help answer?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, so they're the same thing, but they're different currently. But I guess when you're working with an existing product, people have their way of doing things already. So like policies is an old feature. Everybody's used to adding a package and then finding what they're looking for, whereas patch management was new and you could do it better. So
not having like some consistency within two processes that are the same.
Yeah, and if it's sort of like the new features prepping us for change in the old feature, I guess.
No, that's definitely something that we have a few areas that we know there's some, you're doing the same thing, but you're doing it differently. So I know as a team, we're trying to evaluate those and actually get feedback on like, what is it that works well about this one and what works well about this? Because ideally, we don't want to have two different ways of doing the same thing. And like you kind of noted, new things are, maybe we're doing them a little differently. We're not forgetting about the old things. We're kind of evaluating those in the background because I know that's not the only place in the product that we know we have things that we do differently. But I know we're doing some testing and feedback and trying to understand which ones work better. So that's kind of how we're trying to do it. But ultimately, we'd like to get it where we have one way of being able to do it.
So kind of is your answer.
Kind of, yeah. I wish I had a better one. It depends. Yeah, it's one of those questions. I don't have an answer if you do, but I know we want to fix it.
I know with patch, it was what's the value that we need to provide. With packages, I can't remember exactly the difference with the packages. As far is it a UI pattern?
Yeah, one's like just a big list in policies. It lists all of them, and then in patch management, you can like filter, and it's like 1 through 20 or something.
Sure. Yeah, I think you were right, kind of on the money with the original packages. Just had been created initially for that situation. With patch, there was different things and different demands for it. So that is likely why it might be a little different. But just as Amanda said, we would push for consistency. So if that is the way it is, we want that to be similar across the board for all packages, without promising new things coming to old packages.
Okay.
So.
Dancing around your question a little bit, I'm sorry. We can try not to dance around other questions. Does anybody else have anything? Oh.
Good afternoon. I'll throw one in here. One thing I really like to do at my school is create guides for my users when it comes to classroom technology or learning apps, that kind of stuff. What's a good way for me to engage my users who, I mean, we're teachers. I've got, 80 teachers running around. They don't have time to sit down with me and walk through a brand new process that maybe I'm still learning. What's a good way to get my users to understand that this is going to help them, but at the same time, kind of weed out the people who are wanting to do the process, who aren't wanting to do the process, and then developing a guide that I can distribute to everybody to learn?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a really tough one to solve sometimes, but it's one of those where if you can find those people who are actually really excited to have like a guide, and having them kind of be your advocates and running it through them and understanding what their needs are, going, here's what I want you to do. How can we make this clear for teachers? And almost having like a subject matter expert or having a couple of them who are willing to help you, that's a really great way of doing it because then it's not just one person who's vetting it, it's a couple people who are giving you insight. And since maybe the teachers kind of all think a little differently or they maybe think similar, they'll be able to give you kind of that verbiage. And when you get somebody to help you with something, they're more likely to be your advocate and say, no, I actually helped him do that, so it's going to help you. And that's kind of one of the best ways that you can do it is get some advocates and get them involved, because once you have somebody involved, they're going to be there to push it for you because they have some interest in it then too, because they helped create it. That is probably the best way you can do it.
Fantastic. Is there better questions that I can ask my user? I mean, I find that a lot of times, like, I will do yes or no questions, and I realize it kind of doesn't get me anywhere.
Yeah.
What's a good, maybe a rule of thumb when it comes to how do I create questions for my users to help me help them?
So another awesome question, which is also difficult sometimes because open-ended questions still need to be catered to what you're trying to do. So what I like to do is write out my goal. What am I actually wanting to learn? And oftentimes that makes it a lot easier because then you're actually forming questions that are relevant. But it really depends on what you're trying to learn. So if it's, what, if anything, did you find confusing about this? Or having them read something and asking something like this. Putting like what instead of did anything, because then you're saying did this. You're just opening that door of saying it's okay that you're going to criticize this. So starting with like something of what about this was confusing? What would you change about this? Because then you're assuming they would do something, and you're already taking them out of that box of like, well, I feel like I'm going to hurt your feelings or something. So a lot of them start with the assuming that they're going to change something. And so it is kind of difficult, though. It depends on your goal, what you're trying to learn. But open-ended questions are always going to be your jam to get it in there and get the right stuff.
And after watching Amanda work for over a year now, it's clear that one of the hardest things with writing those questions up is just not leading the witness, right? Like, that's one of the hardest parts to do.
Yeah.
So if you're just having problems with yes, no, that's actually, you're on the right track at least. So.
Yeah, and if you have examples of stuff you're trying to learn after, I'd be happy to give you some suggestions. So, yeah. Anybody else? All right. Well, then I guess we, oh, just kidding.
Oh, we got one up here.
So one of the things that a lot of us have is we have very small teams, 1 or 2 people. With UX, a lot of times it's an image or a picture that helps. Do you have any specific tools or custom tools that you guys may use that make it easier to build clearer images for us that maybe we could end up using in-house as well?
That's a fantastic question. As far as free, I think, is maybe the difficult piece.
Right. Yep.
But there's trial things.
Yeah, I mean, if you're asking about software that we use and leveraging that, there's things like Sketch. We are very big users of Sketch. It kind of varies on our team, but Sketch, Illustrator, obviously is an Adobe one, which would be paid for. But those are generally what we use to create those visuals. And
Keynote,
yeah.
actually, I've watched a lot of people throw a lot of time. When you don't have access to those tools, you can still build out like wireframes and things using something like Keynote. They may not be the prettiest, but at least then you have something to go through with the workflow. So having something as simple as Keynote to be able to put some boxes on the screen and type in some text, You're not going to get that amazing visual, but you're going to still get some workflow or context around something. That to me is kind of the one that I've seen most people use when they don't have availability into spending money on it.
You could surprise yourself with what you might create. And also, going back to the testing piece, you can also ask what your users include that visual and say, what does this mean to you, or what are you trying to convey with it, and see if that kind of aligns with what your intent was.
Does that help at all?
Yeah, one of the biggest things that I've found is, for self-service, we use it a lot. I saw a great session here where they used very simple icons that made it very clear what they were doing, but either you have to find them online or you have to have somebody who really knows what they're doing with something like Illustrator or Photoshop. If there's any, maybe not open source, but any repos of images and things that you find helpful in your guys' day-to-day job, that might be beneficial for us as well.
Like an open source icon
Right.
library or anything like that. I know that if you, depending on what you're trying to find, like if you're specifically having, I'm like, I need a refresh button that doesn't look like a refresh button. There's a lot of UX forums out there that help with that. There's not something quite as robust as a massive open source tool available to help you with that, but Adam, do you know any off the top of your head?
One of the icons we've been using, it's font icons. If you search for font icons, those are often, can be commercially free to use. So I would search for that, and you could utilize that. Those usually are huge libraries available to you.
Maybe a cool thing to add to Jamf Nation.
Noted.
We hear you. Awesome. Well, if nobody else has any questions, we will let you go. Happy hour is going on. We'll be out there if you guys want to chat with us at all about anything else or any questions that you might have after. So thank you again.
Yep,
We appreciate it.